This is the third episode. The third episode of the podcast, video series, blog series. It's really all just one thing all combined together. But whatever. It's try to give it's somewhat about education, so it's got to be differentiated, I guess, right? So try to make it in a bunch of different formats so people can access it kind of however they decide. So if you're watching this on YouTube, hello, hi. I'm gonna try to record a couple of these. Hey, it's Alex. Hey, I got a new episode for you right now of the podcast, video series, blog series, whatever you want to call it. The series, The Re-Education of Alex Bruzan. It's all about how my experience in education has been shaped by where I live, where I've been from, or where I was from, and where I live. So this is the third episode. This episode is called What's the Use? And before I even start, I should probably say, what's the use? That's a fish reference, obviously, right? You guys all knew that, didn't you? Most people's knowledge of fish is that it's like some weird hippie thing. And actually, did you guys know hippies still exist? They're still around. I see them at fish shows. I've been to a bunch of fish shows wearing a fish shirt right now. I've seen them, a bunch of them at fish shows. And sometimes we call those people wooks. If you see somebody that is obviously a hippie and it hasn't appeared that they have been regular with their showering routine, I guess you could say. We call them wooks because the farther along in the tour that they get, if they start in June and then travel the entire summer, they end up looking like a Wookiee by the time they're done, right? So after Fish's 13 show run at Madison Square Garden in 2017, actually a bunch of people that went to a majority of the shows, they started talking about something getting this thing called the Wook flu, which is pretty topical, right? Because we're coronavirus. I don't know if it's was a real thing or it was just the effects of spending 2 weeks in New York City going to fish shows night after night. I was kind of bummed because that summer I didn't actually end up going to any of those MSG shows, Madison Square Garden. They ended up being called the Baker's Dozen. So there was 13 shows, and over the course of those 13 shows, they played 237, I think, totally different songs. So cool thing about Fish, one of the things I love about Fish is it's always a different experience. So you never get the same thing. You're never going to get the same show twice. So I'm somewhere in the mid 90s of shows, and I've never seen anything that even remotely comes close to the same set over and over again. So, or the same, even 5 songs in a row, really it just doesn't happen. So the other really cool thing about Fish, and I never really understood why more people aren't into them. I don't really get it. The whole point of Fish is just to have fun and play good music. So actually that summer in 2017, I went to all the other shows. I think there was 7 or maybe there was 8. It was Ohio, then we went Pittsburgh, 3 shows in Chicago, and then 3 shows outside of Denver. So that summer it was fun, but I kind of wish I had been to some of the Baker's Dozen shows, but whatever, it's fine. So anyways, the cool thing about Fish is they like to really engage with their fans and do cool stuff with the fans. So because it was Baker's Dozen themed, 13 of them. They actually contracted with this donut shop in Philly, and every day of the show, or every show of the 13, was a different theme, and that different theme kind of culminated in a different flavor of donut. So the 7th night, for example, was cinnamon flavored. It was like double cinnamon or something, or cinnamon glaze, I think was the name of it. And they ended up playing, for the encore, they played Neil Young's Cinnamon Girl, which they hadn't played in 10 years before that. So super cool, really cool that they would even think to do that. And that's one of the reasons why, I like them, is because they just do cool stuff like that. Honestly, I don't know why more people aren't really into them. I started listening to them when I was 15. My first show was Alpine Valley in 2000. It was July 17th or something like that, I want to say. And actually, I guess the anniversary of that had just passed. It's been 20 years. So pretty wild to think you've been doing the same thing for 20 years, going to concerts for this band. But I mean, I guess I think it's strange that more people don't like him because I like him so much. And I know like we all like different things, and like it's just like this one thing I like is just so awesome. I'll go on Reddit sometimes and look up stuff. Like I pretty much only look up fish and Milwaukee, and on the fish subreddit, they talk about all the time about like people getting it, like in air quotes, like getting it after going to a show or like listening to like a really good version of a song. Um, I think maybe like getting it or specifically not getting it is like the key to understanding why people like fish and why some people don't. I mean, I guess like to get it, you'd have to like understand the point, and the point is it's four guys that have been playing together since 1983, which just so happens to be the year that I was born. They've never played an identical show, no repeats, the entire Baker's dozen. The experience of the show is almost as fun as like hearing them play. Most of the shows, they like there's a portion of the parking lot or like wherever the venue is that's reserved. They call it Shakedown. It's where like you can go and buy shirts and drinks and food and like other random fish related stuff. So, and like when you're in the show, like there's always like this anticipation of like what's the next song gonna be, or like are they gonna play some kind of bust out like a song they haven't played like in 10 years. Or like a really awesome version of a jam, like a really jammed out version of a song. So like we were at Alpine last year and they played Ruby Waves, and it was like a 36-minute version of that song, and it was just awesome. So whatever. I mean, I guess like if you don't like fish, you probably just don't understand like what the point is. They just exist to have a good time. The point of liking fish again is like you got four talented musicians from Vermont. They take the music seriously. They don't really take themselves that seriously. And yeah, I mean, they just come together to give you a unique experience through the music and having a good time. So, I mean, if you kind of were to boil it down to it, like the point of fish is to jam and have fun. And if you know that going into it, it's way easier to enjoy the experience. And in fact, I would suggest that like fish is probably only accessible if you understand what the point is. Otherwise, it just sounds like a bunch of random noise, and like only the Wookieest of Wooks would like that, if because they don't understand like what the point of it is. So, all right, so school, right? Because this is the re-education of Alex Bruzan. It's kind of like the idea of how is education tied, or how is my views of education, or how do I see education, having grown up in the suburbs of Chicago and then living in the inner city of Milwaukee for 14 years. How has my experience or my thoughts on school changed through that experience? So, what's the point of it? Like, that's a really good question. Like, what's the use of school? What's the point of it? Over the years at Docky, we've interviewed hundreds or even thousands of kids, and we asked them these versions of the same questions. Like, what's the point? Like, why are you here? Most of them have no idea how to even respond to any of that because they just think like they have to be there. Those students, like typically, over the history of our school, the students have typically been credit deficient or disengaged with school in general. And most of them like have no idea what the point of school is. And it really makes me wonder, like, how many kids all over the place don't really understand what the point is. What's the point of any of it? Why do we show up here every day? And by the way, that's like a totally different question than like, do I like school, or does school make me feel a certain way? Which are good questions to ask, but it's like a bigger, more macro level question. Like, what is actually the point of all of this? And if we're going to answer that, like, what's the bare minimum outcome we're looking for? What's the thing that if we achieve it, we win? What has to be evident a few years out in order to show that locally provided education has reached the goal that it was going for? That's a little easier to quantify at the end of higher ed, what the point of it was. Like if you are in med school, you are preparing to be a doctor, so the point would be to acquire the skills necessary to work on people. If you were in a welding program, the point would be to develop the skills necessary to use like gas and flame to fuse two pieces of metal together. It'd be a tough sell for someone in med school to be required to take a welding class because that wouldn't make any sense, because it would be way outside the scope of the purpose of that particular program. One of the issues with defining the purpose of school is that there are so many pathways a kid can take after they finish up high school, like to a meaningful, fulfilling career. The pathways are different, but the end result is supposed to be pretty similar. Eventually the kid becomes an adult, and they've got skills they have acquired to go make money in the marketplace. They have this thing called like a marketable skill. Marketable skills are the thing you go and do that makes money in the marketplace, which is the way that our society has structured their like the free market economical system. So the thing is man, and I read this thing, and this is reminding me of this right now. I read this thing recently that in areas of high concentration of poverty, like the area that I live in, many people choose or like are forced to operate outside of the norms of the market economy, which is like kind of manifests in doing these like part-time gig work kind of things, like doing a task for somebody repeatedly, like you're the guy that fixes this thing. It's not like it's not necessarily your job. It's just what you do to make money, which I mean is sort of like a job. So it's kind of like a totally different dynamic. So this reminds me of this guy, this neighbor we've got, kind of down a little bit, 4 or 5 places down, houses down. So nice enough guy. And he started pretty recently repairing cars on the side of the street. There's like an apartment kind of area. And so it's a 4-family kind of setup. So I guess you call it an apartment. So fixes the cars outside of the apartment, like more or less on the street because there's not really space. I'm not really sure why he like is choosing to do that rather than try to get a job like in a shop, basically. But I've learned enough from living here that healthy people pretty much just do whatever their best option is, and we just kind of roll with that. And so one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is this idea that really there's no judgment, no blame. Everyone is just doing the best they can with what they can or what they have. And that guy's just doing that same thing. So, and I think the thing is like, it's actually going pretty well for the guy over there. He's kind of working on stuff all the time. And after like thinking about it for a little bit, like that's exactly like what I'm talking about. Like we need people to leave high school with a marketable skill. And probably a bunch of other requisite skills that are going to help kind of take those marketable skills and then put it into something that they can actually use to have a steady income of money. So this actually makes me think about this other guy I met a couple days back now. We were just talking, and it was a friend of a friend of one of my friends, so a friend of a friend. And this guy was turning 50, and he's like currently not working. And I mean, he wants to, like, he genuinely wants to like be working and have full-time employment. And actually like is kind of strange because I had been thinking about temp agencies up until then. And he said that that even the temp agencies aren't hiring. And so that I don't know what that means, but the point of a temp agency is to provide work opportunities for those that are struggling to find work. And people that struggle to find work are the same people that don't have a clearly defined marketable skill, because if they did, then they would go use it in whatever career field that they had chosen. And so I've seen way too many of my neighbors and too many of my former students for sure struggle to find work, struggle to take that next step where they've got a marketable skill and go take it out into the marketplace. And it really makes me wonder how school was framed for them. I wonder if anyone ever bothered to tell them, like, this is the point of school. All right, so back to pathways. Basically, we can break down like where a kid can go, and there's really when we cluster these pathways together, there's really only, I think, 3 options. And when we say pathway, we're really just saying like next steps after high school. What's the next thing you can do to acquire a marketable skill so you can go out and you get a job? So you can go to a 4-year university, you can go to a tech or a trade school, or you can go right into work or the military. And I kind of lump those together because they kind of have like an on-the-job type training format. A student who is going to work in his parents' drywall company already has been working in the field and already working with his parents. Is on the job trained to lay sheetrock, basically. So somebody that goes to the military, similar, different obviously, but similar in that they're gonna learn how to be in the military while they are being paid to be in the military. All right, I think we've gotten to the point in society where we no longer favor one of those options over the other. enough outliers exist to prove that outliers don't really exist, and that the norm is that those are three totally appropriate and equal pathways. Four-year universities are definitely not the end-all be-all in marketable skill preparation, like the perception might have been in the past. So like 20 years ago in the suburb of Chicago where I grew up, it was like 4-year university or bust. And I had a lot of friends that went that route, or friends like after, when I moved up to Milwaukee that went that route, and actually it was 4 years and then bust. Like they couldn't figure out, there was no marketable skill acquisition. So, and actually there's probably a lot of jobs right now. I mean, there are, and that the amount of jobs that are growing in this area of like, you just need to know how to do these couple of things, then you can take that out into the marketplace. So graphic design would be an example. You just need to have some talent, and then you got to have a couple of skills that are around that talent, and then you can go out and you can become a graphic designer. I talk about my wife all the time, Meg. Meg's a web designer, so she built websites using the WordPress format, and she took one college class at our local technical college in order to learn how to actually go and like do all of the skills like that she needed in order to get started. Now she's learned a ton along the way, for sure, but the only thing she needed to do to get started, to start acquiring clients, was take this one class. So, and like tech and trade schools, they're not like seen as a secondary option anymore. I think they used to be for some reason, and I'm really glad that they're not, because I don't think that they should be seen like that at all. In many ways, they're like the best option, and they provide the clearest pathway to learning a marketable skill. If you want to work in the culinary arts, for example, you go to the tech school and you learn culinary arts. Pretty simple. Then you get a job. Cost is cheap. Students' time is highly valued because they're not required to take a ton of courses that are like outside of the discipline. So that's awesome. Working right out of school is a little tricky though, because like, and I've seen this happen a lot. A lot of times it's used as an excuse to not acquire a skill. Actually, excuse me. There's a difference between finding a job after high school and having a job lined up that's going to train you in whatever skill you need in order to work in that field. In fact, I've known a ton of young people that say they have work for after high school, only to have that work either like fall through, or even worse, like they're doing something that's just horribly unfulfilling. And that unfulfilling work like creates disenfranchisement between the individual and the idea of like working, which is really confusing for a 19-year-old. And I think is what happened is they missed the point. The point was, you're supposed to be able to acquire a skill you can use to make enough money to live whatever version of life that you want to live. Having a job wasn't the goal. Having a skill you can use to get and maintain a job is the goal. All right, so I live in a neighborhood where the median household income is $24,000 a year. That's more or less the equivalent of a 12 hours, $12 an hour for 40 hours a week. Basically, you just double. So like if you make $50,000 a year, you make about $25 an hour. If you make $100,000, it's $50 an hour. If you make $30 an hour, $60,000 a year. So that's how that math ends up working. So it's overly simplified, but it works. So average household size is around 4. Here it's probably a little bit more, but we'll just go 4. And I just kind of want to run this through real quick so that we can see like $24,000 a year is not enough money to live on. It's enough money to survive, but it's not enough to do much more than survive. So family of 4, if you make, that would be like, if you can squeak by with family of 4, maybe could squeak by with $400 a month worth of food. And even like, this is all based on the supposition that you don't have to pay taxes on any of those 24,000, which isn't necessarily true. So $400 a month worth of food. If you can try to keep your transportation costs down to $200 a month, that means that you've got about $200 for each of the 4 people that are living there to last throughout the month for anything else that might come up, which there's always things that come up. So that means, and by the way, that ends up being about $7 a day. So I'm not making any judgment. Again, no blame, no judgment, but you need more than $7 a day probably to manage life. You just do. So thing is, though, there's like 30,000 people in my zip code, 53206. And median, of course, means the middle number. I was a math teacher for a while. So median means the middle number, which means half the people make more than 24,000 and half the people make less than 24,000. And so that would mean then if there's 30,000 people in the zip code, 15,000 of them, and the 15,000 of them make less than that. And because my zip code is 99.2% non-white, that means that you've got at least 15,000 people making less than $24,000 a year that are all African American. And if we're at that point, that means we've got a whole bunch of people that don't have marketable skills. And that was kind of the point of public education, was to help prepare you to have a marketable skill. I wonder what would happen if we reframed public education in a way that made it clear what the intentions were, which again are to prepare young people for the acquisition of marketable skills. I've said marketable skill like 30 times. I feel like if we did that, then our jobs as educators would just be like to make that happen. We wouldn't necessarily be so worried about test scores. We wouldn't be so worried about a variety of other things. All we would really be concerned with is this kid going to leave us and be able to take the next steps on their individual journey in order to acquire a marketable skill so that they can make more than $12 an hour and they can, live whatever version of their life they want to live. That's what's missing in this area is marketable skills. Like I'm not being facetious or over exaggerating. I mean, there's a significant deficit in marketable skills in my neighborhood. In design work, you might want to consider designing to the margins. The margins are the extremes of who a system works for, and in our case, doesn't work for. The people in my neighborhood and the students I've worked with at what used to be a credit recovery school leave the public education system without the ability to access a marketable skill. These people are particular to my social spheres because of where I live and the students that I interact with. But they can be found all over the place. 53206 and the kids that I've worked with in the past, it's not just one zip code in one city. It represents all of the marginalized places, and former credit deficient students aren't only found in one school, of course, they're found in every school. So it's really just a microcosm of poverty, in high concentrations of poverty in general in urban areas and probably outside of urban areas too. That's just where I'm familiar with. And also like this idea like of we're credit deficient, and we and our goal, and we're I guess so confused about our goal is probably the right way to put it. So okay, all right. So if you got anything from episode 2, you know that access can't be confusing. Like we can't make access confusing. Like the doors to the stalls need to look different. If you don't know what that means, go back and listen to episode 2. I wonder how much of the marketable skill deficit is due to the confusion about the purpose of school. All right, so second only to I don't know, the most common response to the question, what is the point of school, I've gotten is to graduate? ? Public education is more likely to be framed as something to get through than it is the pathway to acquiring a marketable skill. I used to think the point was to provide a baseline level of knowledge that everybody needs to have. But the more I taught Algebra 2, the less I believed it, because there's like learning targets and standards of things that we were supposed to teach that very few people actually are going to end up needing. Time I spent teaching a kid that struggled to get through the course was time they could have been spending doing an internship or like actually working on the skill they hope to take out into the marketplace someday. I think there's some new design work that can be done. The vision of the public school system could be reframed and then over-communicated out. It could be redesigned to provide access to thousands of kids that live in 53206 and are represented in lesser concentrations all over the country. The point of this episode isn't to tell you specifically how I would do that or even what some recommendations might be. The point is to make an argument that a reframing, or at the bare minimum, a solidification of the purpose of our educational system, would stop alienating those in the margins and provide clarity for why kids should engage in what we are offering them. Here are some reframing thoughts and questions that could help in like the reframing or clarifying process. So, first thing, the 3 tracks that a kid can go on are different. Okay, what would we highlight in all 3 of them? How do we make sure a kid chooses the track that is personally best for them, not whatever a parent or a teacher or somebody else is dictating to them? What is personally best for them? How do we make sure a young person with the guidance of a trusted adult is making a decision that is in their long-term best interest in terms of their pathway? And that definition for long-term best interest is probably different for every kid. What would be different in the pathways? Are there courses or even better yet, learning targets that we can definitively say are for one track and not the other? And how do we make sure that when we have those differences, that those learning targets or those skills are treated the same and are aligned to the purpose of acquiring a marketable skill? How does speed in decision making play into this? When would a student's intended pathway start forming? What type of life experiences would be helpful in expediting the process? Like if we see a lot of traction after something like a career fair, what is the appropriate placement of the career fair in the calendar? And like, what's the system for following up? Do we want to push that earlier, or do we want to have it wait longer? I don't know. Just something to think through. How would an educator take what they are currently doing and modify it to help fulfill the newly defined purpose of school? What type of teaching method would be used in each of those three tracks? Does PBL make more sense in one versus the other? What trends in higher education would indicate that we need a shift in teaching practice in order to adequately prepare kids for future success? What does the end result look like? I mean, what are we trying to accomplish? What signs would be valuable in measuring success while a student is in the system and then after they've left the system? What constraints currently exist that would need to be accounted for? How are the deeper learning competencies, right? Because those are important. Content mastery, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving, academic mindset, and self-directed learning. How's all that stuff going to be taught? And is the teaching of these competencies framed similarly to the purpose of school? These are the skills that are going to allow you to excel once you have a marketable skill, and we're all better off in those areas. In those areas, if we've got some serious growth within whatever our given field is. All right, so why would we bother doing any of this? Why would we bother changing anything at all? And that's one of the points of this entire podcast, blog, video series, whatever this thing is called. That's one of the kind of the points of this is like, why? Why would we do that? Why would we bother doing that? And a lot of times the answers fall back on what I see in my neighborhood. And I think I've said this before, and I'm not necessarily like I think that there's probably, it would be awesome if one day poverty didn't exist. I think that would be fantastic. I would love to be a part of trying to make that happen, which I think pretty much all of us would love to be a part of making that happen. I'm okay if there are some people that I guess that end up living in poverty. I think it may be inevitable, but I don't know. And I suppose again, if there's a way to try to make it not be inevitable, then we should probably go that route. I do think disparity in economic status is probably always going to be there. I mean, we're not going to be running a communist society anytime soon. And even then, I don't know if it was necessarily equitable or not. And again, like, that's not the point or the purpose. What I think is actually the issue is how concentrated the poverty is, and how it really is 4 miles from one of the richest areas in the city to one of the poorest areas in the city. And when I say we, I'm actually talking about the people in my neighborhood that are living in poverty. They and we are all clumped together, and that the level of how we're segregated by our economic status, that's the thing that I have an issue with. And I particularly have an issue with it when we have a high concentration of areas of poverty, and 99-ish% of the people are people of color. And I just don't think that that's okay. So disparity in economic status might always exist. I mean, and the problem is how concentrated the poverty is, and the disparity is so disproportionately skewed to one race. Okay, so ease of access. If ease of access is a prerequisite to equity, which I believe it is, and there are inequities in the outcomes of our educational system as a whole, then it can be concluded that the ease of access to acquiring marketable skills, and this is going to become a theme later on, isn't the same for people that look like me and people that look like my neighbors. The ease of access is not there because the outcomes are not the same. You take a person that looks like me and you run them through the system, and you take a person that looks like somebody that like the predominantly somebody that looks like they live here, and you run them through the system. I don't know a better way to say that, and you get way different results. So the longer I spend here, the more I believe that it to be true, because I meet awesome people, like great people. They just don't have marketable skills. They don't know how to go and obtain a marketable skill. It's like the guy who was 50 I was talking about. It's the guy like that was working on the cars over there. They don't know how to use the marketable skill to go out and like make some money in the marketplace, like enough to sustain a life. And what it's going to boil down to is this: access that was easy for me is not as easy for them. And that isn't an indictment on me, and it is not an indictment on them. It has nothing to do with my character, nothing to do with their character. It has to do with how we started out, and it has a lot to do with the color of our skin. And those two things, how you start out in life and the color of your skin, you can't control those. You have no control over that. You're born and you look a certain way, and you've got parents, and if your parents have had a couple of generations worth of economic growth happen, then you're probably going to be better off. And if they haven't, you're going to struggle. And our system is set up, and I think it's largely in part because we don't clearly communicate what the point of our educational system is. But our system is set up to favor one versus the other. And unfortunately, or fortunately, or however you want to think about it, it's set up to benefit people that look like me. And I'm sitting here telling you that it's not okay. It's not okay that we do that. Access, again, that was easy for me is not easy for somebody that lives here. And the school system, that's actually the thing that we have for leveling, we call it, leveling the playing field, or trying to compensate for what was, for me, a natural ease of access. The school system should be our system or our mechanism for providing that providing that ease of access. So again, if I had to sum this down into like a one thesis statement, reframing our purpose for school at least minimizes confusion about what the point of school is. And if school is our access point to marketable skills, and provides us our ease of access to obtaining a marketable skill, that has to be our most equitable system. And that means that the results, regardless of where a person started, where they attend school, and what they look like, there should be no difference in the end result of anybody that runs through that system. So that's a very lofty goal, and that's something that isn't necessarily fixable or easy to create or design overnight. But again, we can't have disparities in educational outcomes solely based on the starting position of the student's economic status and the color of their skin. So that was episode 3. What's the use? It's a Fish song. Get it? You should look it up. It's a pretty good one. So next time, got another episode coming up in a little bit. And by the way, if you're listening to this, someday there might be a version 2 of this episode, because this whole process is either going to have the first couple, maybe we call it a season. I don't know. I guess that's what you do when you have one of these things. So the first season is going to wrap up right around 10 episodes. And then at some point, maybe I can get a little fancier and maybe figure out a better way to record this or do this. But it's all important information, and I want to get this out there because I don't think what we're doing is right, and I think that we need to do something different. And we is just everybody, because our outcomes aren't the same. So, okay, that's it. Signing off for now. We'll catch you on the flip side. See ya.